Welcome back, Tribe. We got an interesting one here called The Trouble with Men, How the Modern Male Has Reached Crisis Point and What We Can Do About It. Men are in trouble. Boys are in trouble, big trouble. In education, the gender gap is growing inexorably, with girls far outstripping boys. In the employment, men's wages are plummeting as they increasingly fail to navigate a job market that has changed radically to make employment fairer for women. With family, men are becoming steadily more dislocated. 1 in 5 don't live with their children. I wonder why. Men also account for 2 out of 3 deaths of despair from self-delete or ODs. As the world has changed, leveling the playing field for women, millions of Western men have failed to come to terms with a remodeled society. Men face an existential crisis, confused over their place in the world, lost at home and work, and suffering from an epidemic of loneliness and plummeting self-esteem. If we care about boys, how do we respond? Can Western societies both continue to fight to improve women's rights? A battle that's far from over. What? And start addressing the masculinity crisis. The masculinity crisis is fabricated. Enter Richard Reeves in his new book of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It. If there's anyone who can navigate this fraught subject even-handedly, it's this card-carrying feminist. He is the consummate liberal, former director of Britain's progressive think tank, Demos, Nick Clegg's director of strategy when he was deputy prime minister, and currently senior fellow with America's esteemed Brookings Institution. Amid social media culture wars, questions around gender seem impossible to address with nuance and compassion. Raising the problems besetting men is often seen as anti-feminist. Reeves hopes his liberal pedigree and feminist ally credentials will help him argue that society can be both passionate about women's rights and compassionate about the plight of men and boys. He's calling for nothing less than a complete reimagining of what it means to be a man in the 21st century. Pro-social masculinity for a post-feminist world. This is not going to resonate with young men. This is why this is like a little teacup of horse shit that they're feeding everybody as if they care and they're now solving a problem. This is why people like Tate are so popular, because they speak directly to the hearts of young men about the realities of the world and what it means to be a man. Pro-social bullshit and then feminist lingo drizzled on top with double speak and this. None of this matters to boys. You're not going to get boys to live in this post-feminist era where they're going to like to play with dolls and paint their nails and be emotional. This resonates with no man. Class and race. Here we go. More division are central to the problems affecting men. The crisis in the workplace, school, family are exacerbated for working class and ethnic minority males. We now see really big gender inequalities in education, just the other way around to the way we're used to seeing them, Reeves said. That's happened incredibly quickly in my lifetime. Women outnumber men in almost 2/3 of British degree courses. When I was born, 30% of college degrees went to women. By the time I went to college in the late 80s, it was about parity, like 45%. Now it's nearly 60%. The world my dad went to college in, and which my kids went to college in, is completely transformed. Girls now consistently outperform boys at school. The education gap is troubling in terms of what it means for outcomes for men, because many jobs that previously men could have done without succeeding in education are less available than they were in the past. Yeah, the factory jobs disappeared. Capitalists shipped them overseas to save $1 today, back in their time, to maximize profits. They've eroded the middle class. Then, what do we have left here? We have a bunch of useless degrees that people are going to school for. History studies, gender studies, and all this other bullshit that doesn't translate to anything in the real world except making other people rich on the interest payments that these bozos have to pay back. Now our country's saddled with debt. We can't hardly afford shit. It costs basically a mortgage to graduate high school now. And yet millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in interest profit is being made. This system is not designed to give you upward mobility. It's designed to make a penny off your back for every single step you take up the ladder. It's harder to go straight from school to factory. The result is reduced labor force participation amongst men and slow wage gains amongst many men, especially at the bottom. Yeah, which women dominate as well. Women dominate service industries just for being women. When I was in college and bartending or serving, women get tipped so much. Women can make a living doing basic jobs like bartending and serving because the tipping structure is so in their favor, at least in America. A woman can make a ton of money getting tips. A man gets very little in tips. And often he's relegated to other jobs while the women are put in the front of the house. For example, you want to bartend, unless you're very good looking, you're probably going to get just shoved into being a bar back. You're carrying the heavy ass fucking kegs and changing out the beer. They're going to put the bozo dumb women up there at the front to mix all the drinks because it's not hard to put orange juice and fucking vodka together. Duh. Family collapse. Here we go. With boys trailing in education and men struggling to adjust to the new world of work, the modern male is increasingly dislocated from society. There's a rise in the number of men who aren't a big part of their kids' lives as a result of all kinds of changes in marriage, women's economic independence. There's been a combination of swirling social, economic, and cultural changes in an incredibly short period of human history that's left many boys and men disorientated. It's clear from the data. In Britain, self-deletion is the biggest killer of men under 45. Isn't that some crazy shit? Is that not a symptom of a broken, sick, degenerate society? That the number one killer of men is endgame by the user. Isn't that something? So there's reasons to be worried. Reeves' research led him to conclude that the education system is structured in ways that favor girls. That's no fault of girls, obviously, but down to the fact that boys just develop a little bit later than girls on average. Again, that's also part horseshit too. It's not the reason. We learn in different ways. We learn with our hands. We learn by taking things apart. We learn about we like things. Women, girls, like learning with faces, with speaking, sitting down, talking. They're more interested in people. Men are more interested in things. We should be separated in schools. The co-education system is a fucking failure. I'm going to tell you right now. Not only are boys and girls distracted by being in the same place, so they don't even get to intake all the information like a sponge the way they should, but they're constantly getting in trouble with one another. They distract one another. They get into fights because of one another. They're constantly trying to show off and get into all the social degeneracy because they're in each other's presence, because they're young. They don't know any better. Schools should be separated for boys, for girls. You want to talk about efficiency and what works? Girls need to be learning under a system that's tailored for girls. Boys need to be under a system that's tailored for boys. Boys are hyper competitive. They like to destroy things. They like to build things. They like to know the intricacies of how things work. They want to take apart a radio. They want to understand why all the components work the way they do. And they want to put it back together. And that's great. A boy learns that way, hands on. They want to be hyper competitive against other boys in the class. They want to earn the respect of the boys in the class. They want to compete, earn the adoration of the teacher, their mentor, etc. All these things. You can pump out incredible young boys and young girls if we can just separate them out and tailor the education system to their strengths based on their gender. Yeah, I went there. Holy fuck. How crazy it is to say that. Based on their gender. Yet another concept that has evaporated in the modern world. It says, by adolescence, girls are a long way ahead. Neuroscience tells us something that every parent knew throughout history. 16-year-old girls have matured more than 60-year-old boys. Yeah. Matured in what way? Talking, sitting down, facing people, having conversations, recognition, faces, things like that. What if we compare the opposite? Logic side, things, breaking things apart, putting them back together, engineering, math. Let's compare that maturity. So the prefrontal cortex tells girls, finish your physics homework. Don't go out with your mates. This advantage, Reeves notes, could have been seen as clearly when we had brakes on women's educational aspirations. It was only once the brakes were taken off that they blew right past. It took the women's movement to expose the way the education system structurally disfavors boys, which was CIA funded, by the way. Gloria Steinem is a spook. The teaching profession ought to make money and get a whole gender into the workforce so the tax man could basically quadruple its fucking profits overnight, bloat government even bigger, get more power to the people on top. Oops. In Britain, roughly 70% of teachers are women. Vocational training, which Reeves says suits boys a bit more, suffers from historic underinvestment. Yeah, of course. In his employment, it's a brute fact that changes in the economy in the last 50 years have denuded the labor market of many jobs that men were traditionally able to do, even with low levels of education. Jobs increasingly demand social skills, not physical strength. Then we got the whole pay gap. Let's see if they debunk it and call it a myth. The gender pay gap, which sees men earn more than women, hasn't vanished. Look at that. We're still perpetuating it. Reeves makes clear, but it has narrowed at a rapid rate. Enough of this bullshit article. This is the sugar-coated frosting on a shit sandwich that men have received in the past 40, 50 years, where society has torn men down while raising women up without considering us actually equal. We are simply less than. We are toxic by nature. The patriarchy is evil. Any system that a man has invented, the civilization, everything around us is toxic. needs to be whitewashed in a sense, redone in the feminine nature. And here you have society today, more feminine than it's ever been, more violent than it's ever been, more chaotic than it's ever been. You can't even trust to go into the store while leaving your kid in the crib outside by the entrance, like they do in some other countries, to quickly grab something without worrying about somebody stealing your kid. You can't even go to the park, take your eyes off your kid for a few minutes for the weirdos that could potentially be there. Now you can't even go in bathrooms without somebody potentially, if you're a woman, a biological man, walking in there because I feel a certain way. We're in a feel emotional society and we pay the price every day. We now have created en masse a sect of society, a underclass of males that are extremely feminine, extremely emotional, are pushed to be emotional, disconnected with their masculine essence, with masculinity in general, have no examples of masculinity in the home, fathers have been removed, grows up in this toxic, isolated environment and perpetuates mass tragedies in society today. Has there ever been a time in America, for example, where mass tragedies happen in the rates that they're happening today? I would argue the more feminine a society gets, the more destabilized it becomes, the more dangerous of a place it is, the more heavily masculine, the more traditional a society is, the more orderly it tends to be, the safer it tends to be. It's weird that you can go into a place like Dubai where they will cut your hand off for stealing, yet all women, all men, everybody from all these advanced, enlightened Western nations come there and say, wow, how clean it is. Not a single homeless person, no graffiti anywhere. I can leave all my things, under my towel at the beach, my laptop out in the open, my $50,000 watch right there on the table next to my drink. Not a single person will snatch it. You can't do that in France. You can't do that in Spain. You can't do that in America. You can't do that in any of these highly advanced nations where you have to watch your fucking back so you don't get pickpocketed. Isn't that some shit? Which system is progressive? Which system is serving its people better? Which system would you rather live in? Please let me know in the comments. We'll see you guys on the next one.